The stage is set for a full House debate on a budget bill. The Senate passes a new state health plan proposal, and lawmakers address tornado damage relief and cleanup. Next.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
Hello again, I'm Kelly McCullen. Thanks so much for watching this weekend. The House Appropriations Committee approved House Bill 200 this week, commonly known as the House Budget Bill. The proposal cuts more money than Governor Perdue proposes in her budget, authorizes no new taxes, but does include new and higher fees for education, transportation, and court services. The House Budget Bill cleared the House's Finance and Appropriation Committees this week. The budget writing process for most of that big bill was conducted by subcommittees who've worked several weeks behind the scenes. The Finance Committee endorsed new state fees for many government services, but no new taxes or an extension of the current temporary sales tax that expires on July 1st. That sales tax, if left at a 3/4 cent level, would raise $800 million in tax revenue next year, something Governor Perdue's budget proposes. But House Republicans say that money should be spent by shoppers in boosting economic growth.
The sales tax, while it on a daily basis doesn't look like a lot because you're paying it out in small dribs and drabs here and there as you're making your normal purchases, and it doesn't affect the way that you budget as a whole, but it does affect you at the end of the year, and you say, boy, where did my money go? And $800 million of it from North Carolinians would have gone into this under the governor's proposal that won't go into the state government under the GOP proposal that we're looking at right now.
Under a cuts-only approach, we will be losing a significant number of public and private sector jobs. And so the ability to maintain spending to support teachers, teaching assistants, as the governor did, really would create the demand in the local economy that's needed to allow businesses to expand.
House Democrats say the Republicans should consider a better balance of spending cuts and revenue increases, including that sales tax.
I'm supportive of keeping the sales tax on there because that would make a difference. I mean, this is a very hard budget. No matter who was going to be in charge, this would be a hard budget year. But when you don't look at all of the revenue options that you have, it makes it even worse.
House Republicans counter they're right-sizing the state government through cuts, efficiencies, and no new taxes. But the Finance Committee did approve new fees and higher existing fees for state services, especially in the court system. Court foreclosure filing fees could double to $300. Speeders who receive improper equipment judgments as a court verdict would pay a new $50 fee. There are many other new court fees proposed that budget writers say will make the local courts more effective. Democrats and Republicans are arguing whether some of these proposed fees are actually rebranded tax increases.
These are particularly tough times, and we asked to be in charge. We're in charge, and we're going to make all the tough decisions necessary to pass a balanced budget that's best for all North Carolinians.
I think that it shows clearly that revenue taxes are needed, and the new majority has raised taxes here, even though they had told the voters they did not need to raise any taxes.
GED test takers and driver's education students would pay fees under the House bill. GED testing fees would run $25 per test attempt. Local school boards could begin charging driver's ed students up to $75. Democrats tried eliminating the driver's ed tuition but didn't have the votes. The House Appropriations Committee budget writers follow the GOP promise to cut spending. The House budget bill spends or saves $19.3 billion. Appropriations Committee Chairman Representative Harold Brubaker says the state's rainy day fund and the state retirement fund are fully funded. The House bill proposes diverting $67 million from the Golden Leaf Foundation funding the State Highway Patrol using general fund revenue and not the highway fund. It expects $57 million in new revenue from those new court fees. The state education budget, covering K-12, community colleges, and the University of North Carolina system, is the largest part of state spending and faces the highest dollar amount of cuts in the House budget bill. Public school funding would drop 8.8%. The community colleges would face 10% cuts, but budget writers say the colleges offered up their recommended cuts and they followed the advice. The UNC system faces 15.5% cuts. UNC-TV is under the University of North Carolina system and receives about half of its funding from the General Assembly. House Majority Leader Paul Stam says budget accounting methods make the percentages of education cuts appear much higher than they'll actually be.
In education, the change in state spending on education will go down 5% from this year to the year that starts in July.
In real dollars.
In real dollars. Now, that's not a good thing, but these terrible cries that we're cutting at 13% or draconian cuts or humongous cuts or slashing cuts is just not real.
House Republicans promise they're fully funding every public school teacher's job and teaching assistants working in kindergarten and first grade classrooms. Other school personnel, you could face cuts. Justice and public safety funding would receive a slight increase in funding, but the House budget team proposes a key merger of the Departments of Corrections, Juvenile Justice, and Crime Control and Public Safety into a brand new department called the Department of Public Safety. 195 vacant jobs would also be slashed. Health and Human Services funding faces cuts, but budget writers say current service levels will not be reduced. The early childhood program More at 4 would see its operations shifted into the Department of Health and Human Services, saving an estimated $30 million. Funding for Planned Parenthood would be stopped, and 250 vacant DHHS jobs would be eliminated. When it comes to general government spending, House budget writers propose cuts. Layoffs could come to the Lieutenant Governor's office, the Governor's office, and the General Assembly. Museums and historical sites that faced defunding were refunded by an amendment shifting money away from affordable housing funds. The House budget sets aside $75 million to pay severance packages to workers taking buyouts or who are laid off. $11 million would help boost the state health plan. Josh Ellis with SGRtoday.com joins us, where he is the political reporter for that website. Check it out, by the way. Thanks for being on the show.
Good to be here.
Yeah, you were covering this budget just like the rest of us. I want to ask you, the cuts in the bill, the budget bill that Republicans are proposing, how big are they, relatively speaking?
Well, they're about $800 million if you don't count the whole highway patrol transfer, less than the governor recommended. The Republicans think this is a right sizing of government. This is appropriate given the amount of revenue, but certainly the Democrats would love to see less cuts and more revenue, specifically a sales tax increase extension.
There's far more people watching this than were ever sitting in that meeting where the committee was rolling out the House budget. You're saying the Highway Patrol was moved out of highway transportation funding and into the general tax
It used to be
fund.
funded with the Highway Trust Fund, and part of the logic behind putting it in the budget and making it through the general fund is you have more control over it, you maybe have better management of the budget. What it does do, there's a lot of talk about how many jobs are lost, and it kind of skews that number, because if you look at the total budget, it says roughly 420 some, I think, added jobs next fiscal year. But there's, 2,400 that are coming over from the Highway Patrol, so it really throws that number off.
I want to ask you about that, because the Republican spin is they funded all these teacher jobs and there won't be as many layoffs of actual people, though there will be some. The Democrats are quoting 5 figures in terms of layoffs, 12 to 15,000 people here and there. Which is it? Who do we need to, I won't say believe, but where do you lean on this?
Well, I think the right answer is somewhere in the middle. Certainly, the Republicans have protected teacher positions, but the teaching assistants, there's several thousand positions you're talking about there. And a lot of the other cuts in terms of the local districts getting flexibility to manage cuts, this has been done by Democrats in years past too, so this is not something new that Republicans have come up with. It does give the schools the ability to determine where those funds should be cut from in the most appropriate way, but it also doesn't point out, hey, here's where the thing's going to be cut. So it does hide that in a way. And a lot of Democrats are basically saying this is going to translate to people. We've cut enough waste and expense as it is already.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly, the budget bill may not necessarily cut a job at the local level, but permission will be given to local governments to cut where these boards and agencies see fit. Therefore, layoffs could come from your local bosses, not from the state.
Right, and the other thing to point out is you wouldn't even see that in the budget bill as it is, because it is state money, but it's a local hire. So that stuff has never been included in the budget before, and it kind of makes it difficult to figure out as you're working through the budget.
So if this budget bill passes, if you're a local government employee or school teacher, school employee, look to your local leadership to see what they decide.
Yeah, that's going to be, and you know, they could have the option of maybe raising property taxes or coming up with some other. Property taxes is really their only choice when it comes to finding more revenue, but I mean, that is one option, or they could have to make those cuts as well. Over
100 amendments were considered by the House Appropriations Committee. Did anything move the needle in terms of fundamentals of this budget bill?
The one thing I think was interesting to see, the general government budget had closed down a lot of museums, and you did see that bill revived, or that language restored in the bill that would have kept some of those old history museums open. A lot of the argument being that, hey, the 150th anniversary of the Civil War is next year. There'll be a lot of tourism coming to North Carolina.
All right, Josh. Next week they'll begin debating this bill on the full House floor. We'll hope
this is just the first lap, and many times around the track.
And we hope you'll come back and keep the seat warm for us, share your expertise here on Legislative Week in Review.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks, Josh. The Senate passed a new proposal to reform the state health plan. An earlier bill passed both the House and Senate, but Governor Perdue vetoed it. This new bill addresses state retiree health coverage. Retiree groups say there's an historical agreement that state workers who serve their entire careers in North Carolina service get free health coverage later in life. GOP lawmakers say the state health plan is and has been hemorrhaging money, and all policyholders should begin paying some monthly premium. This new Senate effort will reduce retirees' monthly premiums but not eliminate them. Current state workers, you still pay more for your state health plan coverage.
My favorite part of this bill is reducing the premium on our Medicare-eligible retirees. I think that's something we should do, and that's going to bring it down to $10 from $16-something a month. So that will help them. And plus mandating in here that we put in a good Medicare Advantage policy, and that can give us cost savings and better coverage for our Medicare-eligible retarees.
I'm disappointed that can't happen, and I think we owe it to these people. These were part of the contracts that they signed with us. But more than anything, I'm disappointed that we didn't continue the wellness part, the whole issue of smoking, and we know all the studies show that that's an issue for people, that we can save money in those areas and save lives. And I think it's critically important that we continue those options.
The House will receive the Senate's new proposal early next week, but House leadership says there's no indication Governor Perdue will sign this bill. The full Senate approves a trial program that could fight Medicaid fraud. If launched, the program would install card readers and fingerprint scanners in local Medicaid offices. Some Medicaid clients would be issued biometrically enhanced medical cards, so fraudulent Medicaid filings could be stopped before service is rendered. The program would be considered successful if the participating local Medicaid offices cut their expenses 3% per month under this trial. The Senate and House will negotiate a compromise bill to reform medical liability laws and implement tort reform. Senate legislation would cap non-economic damages at $500,000 and give immunity to emergency room doctors who make less than grossly negligent mistakes. The House's version of the tort reform bill caps non-economic damages in limited circumstances, but not for medical errors causing death, disfigurement, or loss of limb. The full Senate approves new academic testing criteria for public school students. Senate Bill 479 would have student academic progress based on national criteria, including the compulsory taking of national standardized tests for high school students. Poor students would receive financial support to pay for their ACTs when state funds are available.
There was some criticism that we didn't have a plan for testing. We just wanted to get rid of testing and save some money. Contrary to that is the fact that we do want testing, but we need something that's nationally normed and benchmarked, that you can compare our students with the rest of the world and the rest of the country, not just with Chatham County or with Orange County, but with the whole world.
The legislature voted earlier this session to end state-created standardized tests after complaints from teachers that they couldn't teach freely under the pressure. The House Education Committee endorses the creation of tax credits that would cover special education costs. The tax credit is capped at $3,000 per semester. It would cover homeschool expenses or private school tuition for disabled students up to 22 years old. The credit would be refundable. That means parents could receive a tax credit check greater than their qualifying school expenses. The money would come from a newly created special education fund. A Senate committee is discussing, not yet ready to vote, on a piece of legislation to consider paying school students for performance. The legislation would launch a feasibility study into financial rewards for student achievement. Students could earn $1,000 every school year between grades 1 and 12 for achievement in grades, good behavior, good character, and parental involvement in school.
You might call it Learn to Earn. It is, in effect, a different form of Hope Scholarship, or potentially so, depending on the study. It is a study bill. It was initially introduced in 2007.
The state would spend $50,000 on this feasibility study with the report due in 2013. The bill still moving through committee. The Senate has redirected a school corporal punishment bill from the full Senate floor back to the Senate Education Committee. The bill's sponsors freely admit their bill is meant to make corporal punishment more difficult for those few school systems that still practice it. The new policy would require school systems to seek written parental approval before school officials could spank a student. The new corporal punishment policy would take effect in time for the next public school year. The House passes legislation that could constitutionally limit eminent domain in North Carolina. State voters, you would decide in 2012 if local governments can use eminent domain to seize private property, then sell it to private developers, because the developers could use your land and better and create higher tax revenue or a, quote, public benefit.
I don't want to restrict our public entities from being able to acquire lands for public use, but I want that public use to be clearly identified, not for simply purposes of then selling it to somebody else who's going to make a profit from it.
Suppose you owned an acre of land, and somebody said, okay, on a half acre we're going to put a road, but we're going to take that whole acre, Representative Mishaw, and we're going to sell the other half an acre for a department store, because they're going to make more money than you would make. Well, this would prohibit the taking of that other half acre for that department store just because they can make more money than you could.
The bill heads to the Senate. This legislation has cleared one legislative chamber or the other in past sessions, but never both, and certainly never been made into law. The Senate Finance Committee considered a House bill targeting local government-owned telecommunications companies. There are a few North Carolina city governments who operate cable TV and broadband internet companies. The legislation would establish new rules that force these government agencies to act as if they were private telecom companies. That would mean that no city revenues from other city sources could be transferred to support the telecom company. The government could not use its public access media to promote the company, nor could it subsidize monthly rates to undercut private competitors. City governments say municipal telecommunications companies would not exist if the private companies out there would roll out services in their area. The full House approved legislation that now includes a requirement that North Carolina's Department of Transportation seek legislative permission before receiving or seeking some federal high-speed rail grants. It's House Bill 422. It forbids DOT from automatically seeking federal rail grants over $5 million unless lawmakers approve. That's if the legislature is in session when the grant becomes available. If a large grant becomes available and lawmakers are not in Raleigh, DOT could act without legislative approval. Many Republicans say this is a good oversight policy. Democrats say it injects politics into transportation issues.
I've heard nobody on this that's a proponent of this thing talk about killing railroads. I'm certainly not for killing railroads either, but I think we should take responsible oversight.
And it's up to us to decide whether we like rail or we don't like rail, and that's really where this goes. And I really feel like that's unfortunate that we're using this process to be able to determine whether it's your opinion or not, whether we like rail or whether it's feasible or not.
This bill goes to the Senate next. These same provisions are also part of the large House budget bill. Drivers, if you're caught speeding in school zones, you will face fines 10 times higher than current law. The House and Senate have now agreed to increase school zone speeding fines from $25 to $250. Other than the fine increase change in state law, all other existing rules regulating speeding in school zones remains the same. The fines would apply when the school zone limit is activated and school is in session. This bill sits on Governor Perdue's desk. The Senate Commerce Committee takes up legislation that would regulate the cash converter business. Cash converters publicly advertise a service of buying your personal merchandise for cash, not businesses who buy their inventories from manufacturers. Consignment shops, for instance, fall into this category. These businesses would keep records of who is selling their product for cash, including the seller's name and address.
Anything $50 or higher that cash is paid for, you will now have to record. Anything that a check's written for does not fall under this bill.
The cash converter records could be reviewed by the local sheriff at any time. That paperwork would include a statement that is signed saying the merchandise being offered for cash is not stolen. The House and Senate are forming a joint committee to track tornado disaster relief efforts. The committee will track aspects of tornado damage cleanup and help coordinate any state and federal relief efforts that are forthcoming. The committee will also listen to your questions or comments about tornado relief efforts.
I think you can talk to your local member if if you would prefer to contact the General Assembly directly. We'll make sure that the message gets to the right person.
It's reported that 24 North Carolinians were killed by tornadoes 2 weeks ago. 133 people were injured. Over 6,000 homes were damaged. The Senate is considering a Republican-backed energy jobs bill that would open offshore drilling along the North Carolina coast. It's Senate Bill 709. It would establish a schedule for how royalties from oil production would support the state budget. Most royalties would boost the general fund and highway trust fund. North Carolina would join a compact with South Carolina and Virginia to create offshore drilling strategies. The bill also includes energy efficiency initiatives.
It makes an effort to start coming up with an independent energy policy, not just in fossil fuels, but in solar and in wind, that will allow for North Carolina to have an opportunity to continue economic growth and job creation across the state.
North Carolina's coastal tourism and fishing businesses generate $6.3 billion annually and provide 67,000 jobs. These businesses and jobs would not exist without the clean beaches and oceans, both of which could be threatened by risky offshore drilling.
The bill would also explore the idea of natural gas reserves off North Carolina's coast. It's reported 30 trillion cubic feet could be out there. A few bills look to regulate hunter activities in the forest. One proposal we've covered in recent weeks would ensure that hunters receive written permission before hunting on private land they don't own. This other bill is moving through committee, would allow hunters to trespass while trying to retrieve hunting dogs. The hunter better not carry that weapon while looking for his dogs or drive a motorized vehicle onto the land where the dogs have gone if it's off premises and the hunter doesn't have permission.
I don't hunt, so I don't have a dog in this fight, but I do own land. But I do think it is our right as North Carolinians that we protect the dog hunters, the responsible dog hunters.
The legislation allowing the retrieval of hunting dogs would also require hunters to have written permission before hunting on private land. The House approves a new checkoff box for state income tax returns to boost breast and cervical cancer screenings. Tax filers who are due a state income tax refund would have the option of donating some or all of their refund to North Carolina's breast and cervical cancer control programs. That money is dedicated to funding breast and cervical cancer screenings.
What this is really about is life-saving medical treatment. This bill is about saving lives.
The bill carries a provision that would forbid the cutting of early screening funds because taxpayers step up with donations. Bill opponents, and there were a few, say they are not against cancer screenings and voting against this bill, but crowding the state income tax form with donation requests is not appropriate. North Carolina Now Legislative Week in Review features a few online locations on the internet. We hope you'll check us out. Make us your friend on Facebook by visiting facebook.com/LEGWEEK. We also read every email we receive. Drop us a line at legweek@unctv.org. Maybe you're on Twitter. So are we. If you follow tweets, check out @NCNLegweek. You can also do a Twitter search for my name, Kelly McCullin. And this show and updated headlines are always found at unctv.org/LegWeek. That's our show for this week. We hope to see you next time.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.